What we weren't expecting though was a police escort around Singapore. Roy had decided to push the boundaries, and according to them we had entered their territorial waters, so they weren't pleased with us at all. But once we bid them farewell, we actually had a really good sail around Singapore, boat speeds of 10 knots in a brisk breeze. There were hundreds of cargo ships to avoid though, and all sorts of obstacles. Some of them we had no clue what they were actually doing. The worst obstacle, however, was this barge. As we passed it, every fly that was on board their barge decided to make a new home on Pawpaw. We had a fly infestation beyond belief. By midday, we had actually made it all the way around Singapore, which was faster than we expected. So we decided to press on to our anchorage that we had actually scheduled for the following night, which was Pisang Island. Once we were safely anchored, our first job was to actually kill all the flies and clean up the mess afterwards. After a peaceful night, although we had the current with us, we actually didn't have any wind, so we motor sailed to our next anchorage, Tanjung Johor, which was just off Peninsular Malaysia. On Sunday the 5th of January, we actually had one of our best sails. We were on a close reach, 8 to 10 knots of boat speeds in flat seas, as we headed to Pisang Island. However, when we got there, all the anchorages were untenable because of the change in wind direction, so we motored on to Malacca. When we reached Malacca, we definitely weren't expecting such a modern skyline, but the floating mosque was absolutely stunning. From here we set sail for Port Dickson, where we left Pawpaw and returned to Malacca by road to enjoy the tourist attractions. Although it was a real tight squeeze to get Pawpaw into our berth in Admiral Marina, we had the wonderful surprise of bumping into Hakuna Matata and enjoyed some sundowners with them before we all went our separate ways. Our home away from home was the Ramada Plaza by Wyndham Hotels on the outskirts of the UNESCO World Heritage District of Malacca. Malacca was also the first place we were able to experience the traditional Malay and Indian cuisines of the country. After a delicious lunch, we made our way to the traditional Malay village of Kampung Morton, but en route we stumbled across this beautiful temple built in AD 1781 during the Qing dynasty. After we crossed this little bridge, we reached our tourist attraction, the Villa Sentosa, the Malay Living Museum. It was here we heard the phrase, "If you haven't visited Malacca, then you haven't been to Malaysia. And if you haven't visited Villa Sentosa, then you haven't been to Malacca." After our visit to this traditional Malay home, we were left in no doubt about the truth in the phrase. Our host was a retired veterinarian, the youngest of 12 siblings born in the home. The home, which was 97 years old, had belonged to his parents, and he had lived in it all his life. The following day we set out to the main town centre. Our first stop was the famous ruins of the Portuguese fortress dating back to the 1500s, and the small gatehouse that had been renovated by the Dutch in 1670. Our next stop was St. Paul's Cathedral, the oldest church in Malaysia and in Southeast Asia. Finding this slab was definitely unexpected. En route to the palace of the Malacca Sultan, we stumbled upon this bazaar that literally sold everything you could wish for. The Sultanate Palace Museum was definitely not what we expected, but it certainly gave us an insight into life during this era in Malacca. Besides the beautiful Forbidden Garden, it was full of fascinating facts and numerous paintings that depicted life, including what happened to offenders, which was somewhat disturbing. Similarly to today, the punishment doled out was dependent on the crime committed. From here we made our way to the Dutch Windmill Square, also known as Red Square. It was the intervention by Sir Stanford Raffles in 1806 who prevented the British from demolishing what was left of the Portuguese fort, as well as these Dutch buildings. Before we reached the city centre, though, we heard Pawpaw's name being called. Confused and looking around, we eventually spotted the crew from Lady waving at us profusely from the other side of the street. Needless to say, a good chinwag ensued under our umbrellas as an afternoon rain shower passed by. Being Roy's birthday, a lovely surprise awaited him when we got back to the hotel, and that was followed by a delicious dinner with the crew of Lady later in the day. Our last day of touring was a day of mansions and places of worship. After visiting the majestic hotel and St. Peter's Church, built in 1710, we made our way to Harmony Street. This is the name used by the locals that refers to 3 consecutive streets housing mosques and temples of various denominations. Our first stop was this mosque, originally a wooden structure built in 1748 before it was rebuilt in brick. After walking miles in the heat, though, we definitely enjoyed our rest in this Buddhist temple. Another highlight of our trip was this temple, also known as Temple of Green Cloud, and it's the oldest functioning temple in Malaysia, founded in 1645. The next temple was the oldest Hindu temple in Malaysia, although we didn't go into it. Before we reached Yonker Street, we stumbled upon this temple with its magnificent dragons. Yonker Street was a dramatic change from anything else we had seen in Malacca thus far. The shops were bursting with their wares, and food stalls were serving all sorts of strange delicacies. Not recognizing a lot of what we saw, we decided to pass on the sampling. We did, however, recognize this. And of course, Roy was delighted to stumble upon these young ladies. Walking around Malacca, though, we were definitely fascinated by the various architectures that we stumbled upon. From mansions to townhouses, it was, however, the Baba and Nyonya mansion or museum that stole the show for us. It was a complete contrast to Villa Sentosa that we'd seen on our first afternoon of being in Malacca. The opulence and wealth of the Chan family was definitely obvious. From the silk tapestries on the walls of the grand reception hall to the airwell or courtyard and the colourful Shanghai porcelain, we definitely knew we had entered a palace of sorts. This folding cover over the staircase that was used for security to keep the family safe at night while they were upstairs was an interesting feature, along with all the other appliances that we saw in the kitchen. Touring this museum was a wonderful way to end our tour of the UNESCO World Heritage City of Malacca, an eclectic mix of cultures, cuisines, architectures, lifestyle, and history.